Hello, everybody. So thanks for coming to this panel asking if we are a creative studio or a software house. The idea is to explore this topic regarding the creativity and the benefit and downside of in-house solutions versus ready-made solutions. We want this to be a discussion, so at any time, raise your hand, participate. I'm going to present the speakers and throw some questions, but the idea is to flow and be casual. We're on Friday. So, Roy, founder and technical director at Colorbleed, 10 years adventure already.
Yes.
Problem solver. You see tech as a mean to free the artist from the tech itself. And you're a big open source enthusiast and contributor. Lorenzo, you had a pretty nice career already, 3 decades in the industry as a VFX supervisor. Then a lot of pipeline, Ex Machina, Weta, and now you're working at Orca studio as a pipeline supervisor. Graham has quite an history too in VFX and as a VFX supervisor. Then CTO at Dineg 10 years ago already, and now you're CTO at BeloVFX. And Chris, co-founder and VFX supervisor at Megalis VFX. You like to bring your experience as a FX supervisor and a pipeline supervisor to share the passion you have for the industry and create even more passion. I'm Dee. I'm a product manager at Ynput for our pipeline solution AYON, and I'm going to ask the question today. So, guys, from your different experiences, what would you say helps balancing the drive for innovation and the creative process? How do you see those two going together or against each other in your day-to-day and experience? Roy?
Yeah, well, we're a very small studio, so we're usually driven by what the project demands and also what the art director really wants to do in a project. And that usually drives what we're doing, like in the short term, what we're developing as tools and workflows. But then as we do a few projects a year or many projects a year as an advertising studio, we kind of look at what are the bigger issues across all the productions, and that's where we focus the pipeline for. So you have the scripts and tools for short-term solutions, and then you drive the pipeline as an abstract thing throughout that drives all your productions. That's what I'm mostly doing.
So I think in terms of balancing the creativity and the innovation, I think they're kind of one and the same thing. They're inextricably linked, and I think our industry has always been driven by that kind of fusion and perhaps tension between, building the tools and using the tools. I think, for me, the key goal of technology in a visual effects company is almost for it to get out of the way of the artist so that the artist can focus on, doing the thing that we pay them for, which is to create stuff. So, yeah, I think that's my philosophy is, try and keep that tool set as minimal as possible, just so that it doesn't get in the way of what the artists are trying to do.
The technology is innovation. The technology is innovation servicing the creativity.
Yeah, exactly.
So Lorenzo, with the volume and the screen and everything, that's the VFX new technology. Did you see this fostering more creativity? Like Graham saying, freeing the artist from the technology burden?
Yes, well, apart from agreeing on the same things that they have said, I think that one of the things that I've encountered in my experience that it's a bit tricky. It's when artists are used to what they've been already using, and there's something new coming in, and they don't want to change because they are afraid that their productivity or their creativity gets affected by it. So that's sometimes tricky, especially when you cannot count with all of the artists while developing because there's not a production going on. So that's one of the things that in your technical head you think that the innovation will be good, and sometimes in the creative part you find a little bit of struggle there because they don't want to change, don't want to update.
Do you find everyone wants change until you give them change? That's what I find. Everyone's like, we want this new thing, we want this new thing, and you go, okay, here's this new thing, and you go, no, we want the old thing.
Exactly. It doesn't work. No, it works differently. Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, you want to say something?
Yeah, actually, in our case, I mean, especially from the beginning. So originally I was FXTD. Then I did a lot of pipeline over the years, and little by little, you go through all these companies, from the small one to the big one, like ALM or whatever, and you just realize like what's missing and present in small and big companies is not necessary. It's not because it's big they have the greatest stuff. Actually, I thought ALM, that 12 years ago, I thought, it's things missing that I'm seeing in small companies because it's obviously a lot harder to implement. The bigger you get, the older you get, the harder it is to change things. And so when we made our own company, the very beginning was like, the main thing we want is making sure people don't have to make files. And I always say that. I always say, I want the artists to make art and not files. And of course, it's not just about the files, but it's about like, you don't want to do whatever the tools can do for them so that they can just focus on making nice images. And at some point, we had to make a full project. Like suddenly from like 12 people company, we have to make these 2,000 shots. And naturally, our pipeline has to handle the whole process without necessarily the whole team. So we try to constantly figure out how can we use the tools, how can we use things to make the image better, the image better, the image better. And I think this is really what drives us to always create new tools. That's how we use whatever we make, at least.
Regarding the friction of adoption, Roy, you recently implemented a new USD pipeline in the studio. How would you say your agility as a smaller team was helping, like Chris saying?
Yeah, I think it's easier to switch as a small studio because as soon as you switch, there will always be you'll always have a harder time or a slower production when you start to change. And the idea is that you're doing the change because you're expecting to be faster or more productive over time. But the first change will always be a lot of friction and you'll be slower. As a small studio, that's less of a problem because you only have 5 people being slower instead of 100 people potentially being slower. So the amount of costs sink in there is just smaller. But I think the amount of friction from the artists, I think it might be the same. It might be heard even more because I'm closer to them. But I think, it's the exact, we also, except for USD, we also switched a rendering pipeline from Maya to Houdini Solaris for that, with none of the artists knowing Houdini. There's a lot of friction there as well, because some of the features aren't there in Houdini that they did have in Maya. So that's just, that will change over time. But also just some workflows they've been used to for 10 years. It's very hard to get that same familiarity, same speed in another piece of software. So yeah, and definitely there.
The fact that it's USD, standard open source, or Houdini, how would you say that was helping or grinding the transition? Would in-house solution have bring something different?
Well, I think it would have been very different adopting or building something like USD in-house, of course, because you would have to gradually build it up from the ground. And you kind of get in the same situation where you said, the first step we want is just putting some files somewhere, and then that's where your pipeline starts, and you build over time, which is a more granular adoption, so the friction is less, but you also have a much larger track on to be at that effectiveness or less traction or more productivity than you would have if you would have the pipeline now, but have 1 or 2 months of onboarding. So it depends on how many developers you have and how much time you want to spend in that area. But yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yeah. And Graham, when you were at DNEG, you you were on a big company doing a lot of in-house development.
Yeah, and just to kind of pick up on that USD point, you know, if you were to try and adopt an in-house solution, I can kind of speak with personal experience there because you know at DNEG we needed to be able to handle huge environments, and that's challenging. And this was before USD had been released, so we had our own tool that we were writing called asset packages. That's very, very similar in concept to USD. And you know, we thousands and thousands of hours of engineering went into that tool set, and you know, it's a really hard problem to solve well, and it general, you know, in the kind of general case. And you know, when USD came along, it was this kind of combination of, you know, sigh of relief that somebody else had solved that problem, but also, you know, this sort of frustration of, you know, all of that work, you have to kind of throw it away. And I think DNEG are kind of still going through that transition of, you know, so much pipeline gets built on top of the tool you've got. So, you know, asset package is in everything, and they're sort of still trying to unpick it, I think.
So how do you handle this on a new studio when building the new studio?
I think for us, I mean, it's brilliant starting from scratch because everything that other people have said about, you know, that friction of trying to get your artists out of Maya into Houdini. You know, we're using Houdini, we're using USD. Kind of deal. That's the deal. If you want to come and work with those tools, we're the shop for you. So we haven't had to deal with a big paradigm shift like that in the new company. I'm sure we will, because things change. That's the nature of the industry. But so far, you know, that's been sort of pretty straightforward, because that's the pipeline. Those are the tools.
And you said yesterday in your great talk that hiring the right team, the right tech team, was hard process, and you put a lot of effort and time in it. So using USD instead of developing an in-house solution, what's the mission you give to your developers?
I mean, we have a pretty small pipeline engineering team, and a lot of what we do is, you know, all of the things that I'm sure you guys do with AYON. I think our tools are kind of similar in philosophy. It's the glue that joins everything together. We try to keep that glue out of the core applications. And one of the things I looked for when hiring developers was people who were kind of into that vision. I think it's easy. There's a lot of pipeline TDs who've kind of come up through their careers building layers upon layers upon layers of scripts in Maya, and that's their kind of go-to place is like, you know, hack it together with a quick Python script in Maya. And I've sort of tried to get people who would sort of think a little bit differently, and also try to, balance the team as well, because sometimes you need those sorts of people. You need somebody who's very production focused, who can just get shit done when, you know, things get difficult on the show. So, you know, for every one of those people, you kind of want like a really meticulous engineer who wants to plan everything, and you know, you can play those different personality types off against each other in a way, and hopefully, if you get people who are also really bought into collaboration, you end up with something great.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that is changing a lot is the whole industry, and it's changing towards, well, USD. It's a great example. It's in its name, like it's like opening and sharing a lot of more of. You have tons of tools available, a lot of open source, a lot of people scripting and sharing, and that's something relatively new. At least from what I've seen. And I think that that's kind of interesting, because I come from another era where we didn't even have internet, so sharing was super difficult. And information was super difficult to get, so you didn't have the choice. You had to build your tools. You didn't have other choices. And then when you start to connecting with other people, you realized that everyone had done the same tool with their flavor. And suddenly right now, there's this difference that now it's more open, it's more shared. And for me, what it has generated is thinking of an abstraction and being more in the abstraction of your specialty. So it's interesting in all disciplines, not only pipeline, but also lighter lights. And yeah, you can have experiences, you can be more used to light with a certain render engine, and you may feel that you go faster with that render engine, and if I ask you to change render engine, there might be a crisis. But you're lighting, like an animation, it's curves, and it's modeling, it's triangles, and etc. So that's for me very interesting. For example, when I started working with OpenPipe, is that it has a tool set that has a level of abstraction that it's easily hookable to different situations, and that's something that it's also shareable and it's open, and it's in that philosophy, and I think that's interesting, and it's new as well.
Yeah, I guess we have seen these times where the money you had to put into your pipeline because there weren't so much way to share created value that studios tend to keep for themselves. But now we kind of see that's not the, I guess for me that's not the value of the studio, the pictures and the talent are. How do you feel regarding this? Is the studio identity related to the technology it used, or not that much?
Oh, go ahead.
So I kind of go for that one because it's something I've kind of been saying to a few people over the week here, is the industry goes through these phases, and I think when I started, your kind of success as a company was driven by a capability, so you could do something that nobody else could. So for example, I don't know. Sorry to bore anyone who's heard me say this before, because I said it in the other meeting too. I think when I was at DNEG, really early on when we were doing Batman Begins, we built a volume renderer, so we could render, clouds and plumes of steam and tidal waves and all of that sort of thing. And not many other people had that sort of technology. So for a while, if you wanted to do a big environment show with lots of volumetrics, you either went to Digital Domain, you had their volume render, or you came to us. And if you wanted really high-end creatures, ILM, they could do that, and nobody else could. So there was this kind of, you marked yourself out by having this capability. And then, as the tools evolved, and every studio either has their own version, or you start using Houdini, and they start adding more and more of those tools, that differentiation goes away. And so there was a phase, I think, where it was all about scale. The companies that were successful were the ones who could say, yeah, we can take on 1,000 shots of high-end effects and blah blah blah. And so companies started getting big, and I sort of feel like we're coming out of that phase now because things are more open. And so I think, to me, the companies that are going to do well in this next phase are the good collaborators, the companies who can work well with other small companies, because there's no need not to. We're using things like USD, we can share. So if you're not kind of willing to participate in that, I think companies like that might struggle. Yeah. Sorry, I've spoken for ages. I apologize.
That's true, and that's what we're seeing with USD and what you were saying, Lorenzo. When we start sharing the process and the common part of the technology, we all together do more.
I think it's more convenient as well for the industry, because you don't waste time reinventing the same things in different flavors, but you share and you build on something that you share. I suppose that that's the idea of opening code and sharing, because it's convenient that everybody goes The same path when the path is not even written yet, because yeah, USD it's open, but you know the implementation of USD everybody's struggling to find, but it's a different way of finding the implementation because I feel it's more collaborative now than it was before at least.
And there's a potential danger that if we're not competing anymore by I can do something technology-wise that you can't, is that at some point all studios can do the exact same productions technology-wise, and the only thing they can rely on is the people, which may mean that at some point you'll just see like bidding being based on lower wages, which could be dangerous because it just means that you might need more. Like it's more about actual people doing the work because everyone has the same tool set. And I think we should still aim at least on continuously trying to move the pipeline forward. So there's still competition on other areas where you can say, okay, we're competing them because we have this crowd tool set. We're competing that so that at some point on the long-term market, it might not turn into just, okay, we're bidding based on just the hours that we're working because everyone is doing the exact same thing anyway.
But doesn't it put the artist, the talent in front of the quality of the result?
It could, yeah, it could, it might. But there's also a lot of work being done that is, not saying button pushing, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of supervision where there is just like you need, it's more about the amount of people that I think you put on some stuff. And there'll definitely be people that are fluent in like different, maybe less specialists and know about like how other areas will work. But the more we streamline, it might be that at some point it becomes less critical that you have that knowledge because it's streamlined and it will be provided for you. It might be, I have no idea.
Yeah, so there's a topic here around sharing the technology and innovation. How do you feel open standards maybe slow down innovation, like everybody's doing the same, or it's maybe an opportunity to focus on the thing you want to make better because all the rest is already handled?
May I jump in? I'm not in the panel, but may I jump in?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Paul. I find this question very interesting, and I notice it's been coming up ever since I'm in the industry, which is almost 40 years by now. But I actually think that well, you can say asking the question is giving the answer. So you're both. One of the things I picked up late 80s from people working at BBC, they were calling their television program software. And to create software in the sense of technology, it helps to be very creative. So I tend to speak about artists as being more the artistic side of things, and the tools that help you. And this is more a philosophical thing on how technology and art relate. So I have a feeling we're really entering a truly post-industrial era, where we're picking up the way of working from the Middle Ages, where there was no separation between art and technology. And through the industrial phase, there was a very clear separation and a specialized thing. So to hook into what Roy is saying, I think what separates the artists and the people is really their creativity being applied either to images or technology. And that's really where we're heading. So it comes down to people being creative, truly, and cooperate.
And that's where the innovation and the share of the technology may bump each other. Chris, you were about to say?
Yeah, no. Sorry. I mean, we've been through a few things, and everybody's speaking about things. Oh, sorry, and in various ways. It's interesting, really. I feel like I wish we had more hours than that. I think one of the big things that's happening lately is also the fact that we used to have like a long time to do projects, and nowadays schedule for a single project gets compressed. And being able to share technology and being able to share assets, like start with USD if we go back to that. So we've been using USD for like 4 or 5 years now, and we've been going through already a few iterations of how we are using it. And I think there is always some project you're going to get, you're going to use assets. People did these assets, and you know that ingesting those things is going to take a while. And you're afraid to give those things to other companies as well. So in that sense, like how fast, how more consistent we can make things just by sharing the same tools, to me, it became quite essential lately, just because on the other end, we get those schedules that are being like so compressed and like, yeah, you guys in this time you need to do this amount of work. So okay, well, if we remove the ingestion word, if we make sure that when you give this asset, the person on the other side can render it, and you don't have to go through 2 months of iteration at figuring out is it going to look the same as what we did, then naturally we can, and to your point, guys, actually people can all work together so much more efficiently. And I think it's kind of changing completely the era of like this company is doing that and it's their project and they are known for this, and you know, and I think lately we've been talking with many companies that's trying to be collaborative, and it's kind of making all of this so exciting. It's a very different way of, you know, on top of the remote world that makes this even more, you know, simple.
I was just going to pick up on one point related to what you were saying about. You know, do open standards stifle innovation? And I think it's important to make a distinction between like open tools or open formats and open standards, because those are very different things. And I think, do open standards stifle innovation? I think they absolutely do, because it takes ages to get anyone to agree on a standard. But that doesn't mean that companies can't collaborate. You know, I think the AOUSD, or I hate the acronym, but you know, I feel like they'll probably take 10 years coming up with a standard. You know, there's so many big companies, big kind of industrial companies involved in that now. It's going to be really hard to come up with the standard for how to use USD, but that doesn't mean we can't all use it and agree with ourselves while they're figuring out what the standards are, that we'll just structure our USDs this way so you can read it or whatever.
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to ask a question because I think we're kind of on that topic. So in my experience with VFX development, sometimes, I mean, often it's just driven by like shows, needings, and this kind of makes things a bit harder, like to follow like standard DevOps procedures that we have like in slower paced software houses, and that ends up with having softwares that maybe can just perform well on that specific task, but then when we have something similar, we have to reinvent the wheel. So my question is, how do we ask studio manager, like management, how do we make them aware of the fact that like long-term R&D is somehow helping the studio saving money instead of doing like short-term R&D because of studio requirements and reinventing like the same thing always and always? Yep.
You mean inside of the same studio? Yeah, I think the communication is vital. I've had experiences in studios where I would be in pipeline, and 2 months later, I would realize that there was a parallel pipeline, and that I was not even aware of. You know, people were, and it's just started like, oh, I made this script that makes this easier. Oh, great, and they share it everywhere, you know, through their folders, shared folders, and yeah, I think that communication on that, it's vital. Also because sometimes it might already be there as well. You just don't know where it is because there has been not a good communication. So it's a balance as well. Sometimes, well, like it has been already said, sometimes you have to go for the job and deliver. So however it's done, it's good. Because at the end of the day, you also have to pay the bills and you have to pay the people. So the other important part is to go through the process and see where were the needs, how did the production confront those needs, and there most of the times comes up, you know, tools that were meant for one thing, but they're maybe good ideas, and then you ingest them and they become like more core, and they can be, you know, something very particular as well. Yeah, on that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is a problem is it's the middle ground. So I think, you know, you have these well-engineered, well-architected long-term solutions, and they're very valuable and worth investing in. And then on the other extreme, you have the quick hack that you need to get that show done. And it's important not to underestimate the value of that, because that's super important. And those shows are paying all our bills. So if you need to do a quick hack to get the show out the door, that is as valuable as the long-term piece of development that you might be, you know, doing over several years. But to me, where it gets difficult is the middle ground of the quick hack that then gets another quick hack built on top and another one, and suddenly you've got this house of cards. And so one of the things I was, you know, which I'm not sure we've done perfectly on, but I've tried to get into the heads of my team, is like, let's call it what it is. If it's a hack, let's acknowledge it. And that doesn't undermine the value of the people who put the work in there, but we know that we need to take it out into the backyard and shoot it after the show's finished and do it properly.
So it's a continuous conversation, basically. I mean, software is a language. And oftentimes you see the solution appear like I would call like higher up in getting a show out the door. And then if you properly evaluate that, so there's an idea behind that. If it's only valuable for the show, you abandon it. But if it has a broader value, you can sink it into your deeper core, more engineered code base.
Yeah. Hi, I'm VK. So I've been in the industry, but I'm now out of the industry. So I've been there. Now I'm looking at it from outside, and I'm trying to share some kind of insights, which I learned in my career. A couple of things, right? So when we say creative, disruption is creative, right? It can be a technical creative stuff also. It doesn't mean just software. So sometimes we might use the programming things for coming up with a creative thing. So if you want to emulate things, yes, we don't need to. We can go a CIO approach, meaning taking the best tools available in the market, engineering them together. But if you want to disrupt, there is nothing available in the market. So what do we do? So a couple of things, right? Like when Steve Jobs says, if you want to start a company for making money, don't do it. But if you think it is not existing in the market and we need some organization to serve it, then do it. What I've seen in most of the studios is they spend a lot of engineering time in building tracking systems, in configuring systems, in setting up the infrastructure and all, which is not really critically applying for the creativity or mostly to uplift the content creation itself. I mean, so we are trying to do the same thing and emulating. Okay, that company has this good process. Let's do it here. Let's do it here. So what I saw with Ynput is it gives you that baseline. So now we can think about innovation or disruption. So I think still the technology is important, I mean the development, but it's more for disruption rather than because it's not there. Not because it's there and I want to reduce cost. Because that's not our business. So if you look at other industries, SAP, for example, every company wanted to build their own business management systems. At some point, something like an SAP has come in. Now people adapt it, and most of the processes are standardized in businesses, and a number of businesses can work together. That's how global expansion happened in non-studio businesses, right? So I think that's what...
I guess most of the time, when you bring SAP in a discussion, people get, in our industry, like...
Yeah, but it's a problem with the same thing for every industry.
The correlation, but it's a difficult talk. And there are maybe reasons. I mean, the purpose is not the same.
Yeah.
But I get what you say.
Yeah, so this is some
ground
things
being
which are
there.
common, some things are specific. So what is common, I think we should all use the common platform. But what is specific is something which we can invest on.
Milan, you want to add something?
Thought.
I have a excuse me, I have remainders of my voice. I have a comment to what you were asking about how to convince studios to invest on both sides. There is the show critical hacks, which I would called totally critical, and there's the underlying structure. Of course, at Ynput we talk with a lot of companies that have exactly that struggle. At some point they realize, oh crap, we haven't actually invested here, ergo we need to do something about it. But what we see, this depends on an industry. It's maybe less in the VFX, but in animation, for example, there's a huge disease across the studios where they're budgeting everything on a project. And what they realize is, I have a project, 52 episode show, we're gonna do it. They have a chunk of budget for pipeline for that show, but it's for that show. And they have zero buffers for the in-between shows. So you get studios that are frustrated that for the show they didn't have enough money in the pipeline to actually do pipeline that is robust enough. It's patching and patching and patching, and the show finishes and they have a 4 months, waiting period for a second season or anything like that. And then we come in and it's like, hey, how about this is the good time to upgrade, to deploy, to upgrade things, but there is zero budget in between the shows. And we've seen it multiple times when the studio goes, you know what, we believe enough in the next show, so we'll kind of borrow virtually budget from the next show so we can spend it now. And some studios are willing to take that leap of faith and almost kind of pre-spend, because there's almost never any money left after the show. So animation has a massive issue with this, maybe VFX less, but unfortunately we see many studios that budget per project and pipeline budget per project. And we now see with the cloud, by the way, hardware budget per project, and they just look at, okay, so I can rebuild to the client directly my cloud spend. It's lovely. And when you are out of the project, what exactly do you pay the stuff in between for, the storages and other things? And it's so there's a bit of a disease of budgeting showing where many, unfortunately, studios don't allocate anything for the in-between. How to solve it? If anyone knows, please tell me. I need it for various talks. But it happens a lot.
Maybe, Roy, you could share how and why, regarding the core parts, you went for publish and an implementation that was open source and from the ground up, even though it was internal motivation.
I think I've just always been interested in using or working on open source software, because I've maybe originally just never had the arrogance to say that what I would be developing would be any good. So I would just be like, put it out there and get feedback and collaborate. Maybe that was a big part of it, but I just also felt that I wouldn't have the time to really maintain all the stuff and actually improve it over time, because likely it might be an urgent issue now to maintain, but once it works in 2 months or in a month, then suddenly it's not my main priority anymore, but it should still be maintained. And having that out there and being used by others, that kind of does that. We initially funded Publish development, I think 10 years ago, with Marcus Ottosson, and he made that, and now it's open source. But for example, new Python version support, that's all being done by the community, and that's not stuff we have to care about. I don't need to look at it, but I know that over time it will be supported, just because it happened to be open source. And that's, I think, one of the best investments we've done, because it was a small initial investment, and then it got picked up, and the rest just came naturally. And also, Marcus still did work on it, but because it was also his project, I said, like, you don't have to mention us in any way. It's your thing. I just want that thing, and you're available, so do it. And him working on that, then for me, for free, basically, meant that this product was taking off, and it helped me a lot using it in our productions.
You have similar story in your construction, in the build-up of your technology, where you had to choose using open technology or developing something in-house and maybe opening it for gain of traction and sharing the workload?
Yeah, actually, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a time where it's very interesting. Everything that happened just now. There's a time I think my ego was high enough or too high, where I was like, oh, I don't like what other tools are. I just want to make it myself so that it does whatever I want. But that was 12 years ago at least, maybe, where indeed online you wouldn't find that much stuff that you're like, yeah, this is great, I'm going to use that. Over the time, I think we had this process, and I mean, obviously we made the company 7 years ago, so we had this process where we started, is there something we can use right now that's probably going to help us doing what we want? day one stuff was that we have to use Windows because of Blur Studio, we have to use Linux because of this. And then suddenly you quickly realize, okay, it didn't feel like we had the stuff, so we did the base ourselves. But each time we know that we have a time in between projects where we allocate our own budget to develop something, then naturally we always like, do we really have to do this ourselves? Like, it sounds stupid in a way that to feel like if everybody did it, it's probably a way to use it. Like there's a lot of smart people doing things. We should try to trust them and figure out, can we use that? And I think it's also difficult sometimes because you feel that some innovation that your studio is going to do, like the way the studio is going to work, might, not be compatible with some of the tools that are maybe going through the more classical process. And I think each time we just try to calculate, like, can we use this system? Is this going to match whatever ideas we have? So it's always, and I feel like more and more people are going through the exact same thoughts, and more we find actually tools that are doing that. I thank you for Publish.
Well, I guess we can go for Q&A if you want to ask specific question to the speakers. Raise your hand.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Hi, I'm Matt. So you're bringing cases of smaller studios or new studios, and there are like big players on the other side of the spectrum, of course. But what would be your advice for a medium-sized studio, like 100 to 200 artists, with an existing pipeline, an existing team of engineers maintaining it? And is it even worth considering switching over to an existing product, since maybe the existing pipeline does not work well or does not deliver features that are on par with like existing products? What's your take on that?
I think if you're in a position of technology leadership at a company and you're not constantly considering whether it's worth the continued development effort versus the open or proprietary solution, then you're kind of not doing your job properly. That's kind of the job, is you're constantly trying to evaluate, is this the right thing to be spending our dollars on? And so depending on the pipeline that you've built internally, how well that works, does it make sense to rip it out and replace it with something open? It's kind of, every company is going to be different, but everyone should at least be thinking about that. And sometimes it's a timing issue. Sometimes it makes sense to keep going with what you've got because it fits your workflow really well, but you kind of got to consider it.
Yeah, maybe I would also add from experience as well, to try to separate what's pipeline and what's tooling. What are tools that make the day-to-day easier for the artists? Because that will make the switching easier if you want, or the innovation, whatever the innovation is. Is it a third party or even a rewrite from within your company? Having the tools that can hook back to whatever your choice will be. But yeah, you definitely have to have a system where you constantly have to think about renewing, because it's what the industry is as well. It goes super fast, and you need to be updating constantly.
Yeah, I would say you have to invest in creative destruction. I learned this from Shuzo, who is the CEO of Polygon Pictures. And he had a talk yesterday. It was very inspiring. He said, your body is investing more energy in the destruction of cells than in the creation of new cells. And if you see everything as a body that you need to maintain constantly, at some point, we have a saying in Dutch, the wal keert het schip. So the ground will actually turn the ship. So just if you don't invest in destruction, it will start happening, and you will have, it will become chaos. So to drive innovation, it pays off to invest in destruction.
On a much simpler level, for me at least, how my brain works, is I would just personally just test okay, what is the differences between your own integration and what is out there? Test it out. Does the philosophy of the product work for you? How much of your stuff could you build on top of that as one of those quick hacks for production so that you could potentially ramp up soon? And then how much would it cost you to match their functionality so you could come up and compare with them? Or how much does it cost you to transition? If the transition is just as expensive and the philosophy matches, then most likely following their product or an open source product or whatever is the good choice, because then at some point, apparently there's something out there that follows the philosophy that you want to follow with your company, but it's also with other people that have the same philosophy. And maybe I had underplayed my arrogance some time ago, because I do see stuff online. I see stuff in USD, it's oh, that's a stupid decision. And I go online, I go to AOUSD forums and hey guys, that seems like a odd decision. How did that happen? It's using another product doesn't mean that you have to just play along. It's still you're joining their discussion. You're improving that open source product as well. So what I also often recommend if someone comes look at a different product is definitely also showcase what is perfect for your workflow. What are you doing now that you're missing in that test that you did with the product? Take video recordings, showcase that, because then the community can come back and see that, look, that's actually pretty good. We all want that. Or they say, actually, if you change the logic around, this is how we're doing it in our philosophy, which might actually end up more valuable than you sharing maybe something of your workflow. So yeah.
If I may, there's a very important thing to realize if you're considering switching, and exactly as Graham was saying, you need to be always considering writing, switching, whatever. It's there. However, you should never look at any tooling, the best commercial tool out there, open source or internal, as a set of as a finished 100% bit. That is the problem. So it's almost always possible, whatever you go for, even rewriting internally, you're not thinking, I'm rewriting the pipeline, but you're thinking, I'm rewriting my Houdini tooling, or I'm rewriting the database underneath. And when you're thinking in these terms, it becomes much easier to pick correctly and mix and match, because you can go to a tool, say, well, that's actually useful. It doesn't solve my issues. It solves X amount of them. Your pipeline that you have internally will always have things which are better than any commercial product. Always. So it's important to pick things that allow you to put that flavor on top of it. And it's not a one-to-one match. Any studio that ever wants to switch pipeline and they go we have this and this is shit and we throw it away and we put this in and this is going to be great, will fail. And it doesn't matter what is on the side that we're going to put in there. It can be it doesn't matter. It will fail. So you need to look at it in these individual blocks of functionalities and pick your battles. And that's exactly what the panel is about. Where is the balance? I don't think there's a studio out there that will operate on a 100% commercial or open source software with no internal flavor on top of it. If they are, it's 3.5 people with no opinion. And there's no studio like that. There's no studio without an opinion in the world. So it's just finding the right balance and not jumping into things, all up front with everything, because you are probably up for a bad time if you do that. But if you do it sensibly, then you can get the benefit of internal dev on your core application, the one thing that you do on a daily basis. You probably know better what you need to do there, so it's absolutely fair to have X amount of toolings that make your workflow super specific, and you can still have technical edge over your competition, like what Roy was saying, that can give you a bit of that, we can do this really well because we've made this amazing HDA in Houdini that connects to blah, 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 and automates whatever. Millions of snakes, we can do millions of snakes, we're great at that. It doesn't mean you have to write proprietary tooling for things which are important in your pipeline, but they're kind of not important enough to spend 1,000 hours of development on it. So the right way is usually in a balance between them. Like, how many people here use Maya out of the box, plain with no tooling on top of it?
As much as we can, because we hate it.
Fair enough. It's not very common. You know, everyone, for every tool, you build on top. But the problem is tools that don't allow you to do it.
I think
Luckily, they don't exist.
The more you build into an application, you get, you know, there's two problems. One is the vendor lock-in. You know, so many people are using Maya, not because it's the best tool for what they're doing with it, but because they have got so much of their pipeline built into it that they can't get out, or it's too expensive to get out. And the other thing is, you know, even just moving versions within the software, forget about switching to a different one, you know. I think this is particularly prevalent at the big studios, but often they're on like 3-year-old technology because it's so painful to recompile all their Maya plugins and, you know, just get to the new version. So, you know, you pay these vendors a lot of money, you want to be using the latest tech.
So I'm just curious, what would be, in your opinion, the best practices to understand when is a good time to transition to a new technology? Because, I mean, we know that the younger a technology is, the least like reliable it is going to be, like the least stable. So how do you decide if it's better to go for stability or if it's better to go with innovation?
I feel like it's funny because we went through this, like, so I was saying earlier, we started USD pipeline in 2020, and USD was actually out in 2016-ish, right? But for a while, you would be like, yeah, sure, USD is out, but which software is actually able to open it anyway? So when we did the ONI project 2020, at that time, Houdini had Solaris, which was in an infant stage. Nobody was using Solaris in production on 18. And then Maya had a Maya USD plugin that was in its 0.1 version that you could open USD, sure, but there was nothing. And whatever tool you wanted, you had to actually code it yourself. So yeah, you're right. Like, why would you use that at this stage, right? So I think it's a matter of figuring out, like, well, first, who's behind that, I guess. Because if some people release that, they might be smart enough that it's actually reliable. But then I think, honestly, what we did on our side, we wanted to do this. We felt, okay, nobody's going to use Solaris in production yet. But there is one way, is we actually talked to side effects. We talked to Autodesk because we were using Arnold. And we're like, guys, we have this project. We want to make it great, but you're going to have to support us. You have to be here when we tell you this is not working, this is not working. And in the end, it's good for everyone because they develop it, then, you know, they use this project to say, yeah, that was actually working. And I feel like it's a matter of judging if that technology, even though it's young enough, you know, like, does it have the support you need to consider, okay, it's fine. There's some people behind that stuff. Or is this a random tool that appears online and maybe nobody's ever going to touch it again? Like, I feel like this is a choice you have to make sometimes where, you know, unless you have time yourself to take it over.
I just want to answer on the stability part. So if you want to achieve scale, it should be always stability. So it's a thumb rule, right? If you want to try out new things, then you can try out with all the bleeding edge ones. If you try on a large project, you're anyway going to be ready to overspend on your budgets, right? So stability thumb rule is always, you have to go that way.
The thing is, if you want to be innovative, sometimes you just have to believe in it. And
do
honestly, when we use Solaris, at this moment, many people could have said, you guys are stupid. You're going to do a 2,000-shot show with that. And honestly, during 1 year, we were told, are you guys using that? It's crashing all the time, right? We're like, for us, it works great. And honestly, who didn't use the software at the beginning and just crashed it constantly until they just know exactly what makes it crash and you just know how to use it? So I feel like, you know, if...
Yeah, I think that a short answer for us in some cases that I've been involved in, it was, does it solve your problem? And I was working, for example, in a feature in an animation film where it was rendered with mental ray, and we had hair on characters, and it was hell. just to light that was hell. And Arnold was just getting out. It was super unstable, crashing everywhere. But the balance of what it solved for us, the problem that we had was solved so much better in Arnold that it was worth that pain of going through the beta, and the support was super important as well, because we had somebody coming in, setting up, and then somebody that we could talk to. But definitely, I think that one of the important things, just like we said before, is where is your problem? What does this tool solve to your problem? And
yeah, and if it's smaller projects, take for example Pipelish, which has gotten some traction in some bigger studios as well. Like it was developed by basically one guy. We helped him out, just testing it basically initially. But why that got traction, I think, like you need to like align with some philosophy or thoughts. I can imagine a lot of studios already had a similar implementation. They said, well, it seems like we could convert with some cost. But then again, why they ended up switching, I personally don't know, because we started there. But that's an interesting thought. I don't think Marcus particularly has such a friendly face that they're switching because of his profile pictures. Yeah. And do you know why you ended up switching to Pipelish at some point at the studio?
To be honest, I think whatever we had on Maya was like it was kind of light. We had like the bare minimum. I'm not going to detail to add to what you were saying earlier, but our core is Houdini. It's how it's always been. So whatever we did in Maya was always like, okay, we do what it takes to go into production and make it work. And I think at some point we decided to take a more stable thing, something that was a little more, solid. And okay, we didn't do it 10 years ago. It was clearly last year that we really started using it. But this is, that's the thing. It's like, okay, we want to have something a little stronger within Maya. What should we do? Like this Pipelish sounds great. Let's do it. And so far, so good.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to the sort of question about when to switch is, there's a kind of how much instability can you afford? There's an interesting thing from, Google's site reliability engineering teams where they kind of have like a stability budget, and you kind of figure out. I mean, they obviously spend billions of dollars putting metrics into everything, but it's like how far can the service degrade before this is considered a major incident? And maybe it's like 90% for some services, it's 99.99 for others. So I think you're not going to do that in a visual effects company, but sort of trying to think at the moment, if we make this big change that could be really disruptive, can we cope with that right now? And sometimes, I used to kind of, when I was working on shows as a CG supervisor, I kind of had this philosophy of like, to basically break one big thing every show. Like pick one thing that's not working as well as it could and try and fix that, but don't try and fix two things, because then you've got two things that are breaking all the time. So I think sort of trying to, figure out, what's the right time, how much instability can you afford at that time, and kind of pick your battles.
I'd like to just jump back to what both of you guys brought up. Like, you talk about how to convince people, like to actually, basically, if you don't have pipeline, for example, and you want to convince someone to actually spend money in that, but on your side, you speak about like the pipeline is there, but we kind of just want to reformat that in a way. And I feel like on a 100, 200 people company, I feel like the solution is a bit easier, to be honest, because I think there's overhead, 100% sure. There's some people that are not that busy sometimes. And I feel like the best way is to spend a moment to write down exactly your thoughts and ideally some graphics of like, if we do it this way, this is what's going to be different from before. This is the gain we're going to get. And then if you manage to convince that, hey, we could do this tiny, tiny little project, and it's completely off pipeline. Give me a tiny storage, give me 3 machines, and we test that stuff. And it's completely parallel to whatever we are doing. And this, of course, I'm talking about a major change where because people are worried that it's going to break the rest. I mean, as you say, like it's so common to do that. But if you feel like, well, this is just too archaic, or like it's just, then I feel like the best is to convince that you need to do a secondary project. And I mean, let's be honest, all the Pixar shorts, they're basically the reason. Like it's all pure R&D. Let's solve the hair. Let's solve the micro instances. Let's solve, So I feel like the best way is to actually just get on it, make a plan, and that's the only way to convince people. I feel like.
I want to emphasize that if you do the test project and you want to evaluate, like, did this actually work? Don't evaluate whether you were faster or whether the end result was better, because you started the switch. Because in the end, you expect to be faster. What you're evaluating is like, did it break the production? Could we survive doing this? And could we, that survival cost, that extra effort we needed to spend to actually do the production, could we survive that on a bigger production? If so, then that might be a good switch, because you initially thought about thinking to switch because there were other better things in the long run. So yeah.
Well, I guess it's time to conclude. I would like to ask all of you a last quick question. What is the next battle you want to have to solve in your pipeline, and do you have an idea of the solution you want to test?
Survive.
Do I? Yeah, survive. That's a good question. I don't know. I'm kind of sad that I have to go first because I'm not quite sure of the answer. I mean, we're a pretty new company, so we've still got a lot of the kind of fundamentals that we're still working on. But I think, the kind of, I guess I'll give you two answers. There's the kind of short-term horizon, and for us, it's kind of embedding kind of multi-shot fully across the entire pipeline. We have really good multi-shot lighting and effects because we're in Houdini and it's easy. But kind of getting that thinking and that philosophy, end to end, I think it's a kind of short-term goal. And I think longer term, it has to be looking at the promise of AI and like where can that fit in. Does it fit into the creative side? Does it fit into the tracking side? Does it fit into the scheduling side? There's all sorts of different ways that you could deploy kind of machine learning tools to make things better. So that kind of has to be on the agenda too. Oh, I'm sorry. Do I have to drink?
I think it's a good point though. Like I was thinking about the battle versus like what you have to do, you know how to do it. It's gonna come sooner or later, and that's fine. But it's true that I think for maybe the more creative, I think there is like definitely a fight against AI where you're like, no, I'm not gonna let the machine do that. I can do that. Or I don't want to do that. And then the fact that the reality of things is that the people who actually pay for movies, they're gonna request for you to use it, not directly, but they will basically hire the company who can make the job twice faster than everyone else. So sadly, we're gonna have to implement it in a creative way, in a way that is like, well, we can still be super creative. We can still, be like, okay, we can use that stuff.
But Chris, is it something you foresee as something you need to solve? Does it solve something?
It does, because basically, how do you implement that in a way that in 3 years you're not behind everyone else?
Okay, so
that's where I was going. It's like
mine.
This is the state of the industry, and I feel like this is the big thing where I feel like, how do we actually make good use of this while not making like creative bad?
Yeah, I think that on my side, USD, it's obviously one of the things that are there that I would really like to see moving forward. Moving towards AYON, from OpenPipe to AYON. Yeah, and I'm very looking forward a lot on collaboration happening more and more. So how does everything moves in a common way? It's quite interesting, and that's where USD, it's a good base and good example.
Yeah, I don't have a concrete answer on like what would be the next goal to now implement, but I've been discussing lately in the studio a lot that I think it's a lot about finding a new way of designing tools or working with tools. With the come of AI, is that the biggest issue with AI is there's a lot of data and it can do a lot of problem solving. and some stuff it's not that good, but it's if you like change the tools around a bit, it could be super good. Like for example, there's a tool where you just rotate around an object and it generates like based on the depth map and like the photoreal texture for your shoe, and you can just paint as if it's like a projected texture in Substance Painter. That being live, rotating around, paint, you have full control, and you can just switch images. That level of control and everything being sewn like near where the artist is working, I think that will increment the creativity. So that's one side that I want to see progression, because I think that's where we can really start making nicer stuff faster. But on the other hand, from a pipeline perspective, it's usually the focus on stuff that makes 200 shots come out as fast as we usually did 2 shots. Like for example, multi-shot workflows is something that really helps you make tons of shots very quickly. And that's what I think VFX studios are currently still focused the most on implementing or improving, because they see the biggest benefit. But I think we should keep an eye out that once there's a new tool that has this nice interface on top of integration for artists that they can use, to adopt that quickly, because that's the stuff I think in the end will change things around.
Well, there's always not enough time to talk about this. Thank you guys for sharing. Thank you for listening and asking. And we can continue on AI and everything at lunch. Thanks.